launched this series to be hopefully a helpful resource to you during a very challenging time for many organizations in the U.S. today. Our intent is for this to be an educational series for you to seek free, strategic, and technical advice about remote workforce IT challenges. So as you can see here on the screen, this is a series weekly every Thursday at 1 p.m. beginning today. Burwood, as an IT consulting and integration firm headquartered in Chicago, working across the U.S., we've been helping a number of clients over the last few weeks with these COVID-19 related challenges, and wanted to just set the series to extend those learnings and advice to IT professionals everywhere. So hopefully this is an informative and helpful session for you all today. To introduce myself, my name is Colleen Berry. I'm Burwood's Marketing Director, and I'll be your host for today's session. At any time throughout the next 45 minutes, feel free to ping me in the chat. I'm happy to address any technical issues or questions you may have about the content. I'm happy to pipe in on your behalf. And after today's session, we will have a recorded version of this webinar and presentation slides available to all of you attending here today. So we'll send those via email. So let's get into the topic. Today we'll discuss secure remote access. So one very critical facet of the remote workforce challenge we find all of us in today is security, right? Reevaluating our posture is just a critical piece of shoring up our remote workforce strategy. So we're going to get into a number of topics related to that today, from user access, device authorization, protecting data, dive into a lot of key areas of securing remote access in this webinar. Thank you all so much for participating in the survey questions. Our presenters today will use that to facilitate the content. So as we begin, please go ahead and let me introduce our presenters. I'd like to introduce Chris Richards and Pete Vorhees from the Burwood Consulting team. So gentlemen, can you each please introduce yourselves, beginning with Chris, a few words on your role and background.
Sure, thank you. My name is Chris Richards. As listed, I'm a solution architect for Burwood Group. I've been in IT or in the IT industry for about 20 years. I started off with in the infrastructure side, meaning servers, route switch, data centers, and then slowly transitioned to the security side, starting off with defensive security, which is where I primarily have my practices, but I've been moving and expanding my security to the offensive side of security as well. And just as my luck has it, I've had the pleasure or displeasure, whichever it may be, to have been involved with several security incidents, and some good, some not so good. And so I have the pleasure of speaking a little bit of experience under what it's like to go through an incident.
Great, thank you, Chris. And Pete?
Great, thanks. Yeah, Pete Vorhees. I'm a consultant on our security practice. My background's largely under the advisory services practice. So I've been with Burwood for about 5 years. Started out working with HIPAA PCI assessments, ISO 27000, 27001 and 2 assessments, and am transitioning and leading our penetration testing practice, vulnerability assessments, as well as doing the technical implementation or post-sales implementation of firewalls, endpoint security products, what have you.
Great, thanks, Pete. So we've allocated 45 minutes for today's session. Should work out to approximately 30 minutes for Pete and Chris to present our initial recommendations and advice. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. If you have any questions throughout, again, please send them to me via the chat, and I will ask on your behalf. Once Chris and Pete finish, we can unmute lines, and happy to encourage some direct participation if any of you want to speak up about specific challenges or feedback you'd like to hear. So for those just joining us, welcome to this webinar on secure remote access. I'll now ask Chris to get us started. Chris, please take it away.
All right, thank you. So just a quick agenda of what we're going to go through today is we're going to kind of go over the state of the market, what has happened over the last, let's call it, month, just for easy math, and then kind of what are some of the issues that we've seen pop up over the last couple of weeks with the strong push or the rapid push to remote access. And then what are some short-term recommendations that we can see that will help your company or help you as individuals to overcome some of the security challenges. And then in addition to that, we'll also look at some of the future state of where we believe security is ultimately going. So with that, let's jump right into it. As most of you are aware, over the last few weeks, we went from pretty much normal life, going wherever you wanted to all of a sudden this coronavirus has taken over and pretty much changed the way businesses operate or the way workers do their job. And we've shifted from everybody coming into the office or having a standard office hours to now we have a large workforce that's working from home. And that has created a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, but it's also given IT the opportunity to shine. So when we really step back and we look at the timeline, we only had maybe a week or 2 weeks in IT to rapidly shift our workforce from an office space to a work from home. And so kudos to everyone in IT who made that happen. That is no simple task by any means. That doesn't mean it all went smooth or everything was perfect, but it does show what IT is capable of when put into the fire, so to speak. So that said, there are some things that we ran into or that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and that some that we may not see for an extended time here, but will pop up. And so we just wanted to highlight those real quick before we jump into the discussion. So the first one on the list is device identification and authorization concerns. So many of us, as we expanded our workforce and handed out access so that users could get in remotely and using VPN or using Citrix, specifically speaking towards VPN, is a lot of users are just given a laptop and then they're given privileges to use VPN. What we don't realize in some cases is that just because we gave them permissions to VPN doesn't mean they're restricted from using that VPN client on any device they want to. So I guess what I'm trying to say is once you've given a person permission to VPN, they can also use that client on any laptop or any device that they want to, unless there's some type of ICE or some other method of identity and access management that prevents users from getting access with their remote device. So that is the first concern we see, is that users are given access to get in via VPN, and what they may or may not realize is that they can now use that on any device they want, which obviously presents a security concern. The next issue we'll see is the tracking and managing of remote assets. Obviously, since we shifted from a small workforce that's used to working on Citrix terminals or working on desktops that are sitting in the office, and now we've given everybody a laptop or some type of mobile device to work from. And one of the concerns there is that, hey, we've just changed our threat landscape. Is we're used to protecting the infrastructure as it sits within the walls of the buildings that we protect, but now we have to also think about protecting a larger workforce. How do we keep track of those laptops? So if one goes missing or whatnot. The other concern as we step further in is, and the next concern kind of leads to several of the next few, but obviously we're going to get data is going to be pushed down into the laptops, and whether we have policies set up to prevent that or we let users do it, they're going to find ways. In other words, if I'm a user and I'm working from home and my internet or VPN drops, I'm going to find a way to start downloading those files to my laptop so I can start doing my day-to-day job. And that presents a security concern because those files are now on that laptop instead of on the corporate network. How are we protecting those? What have we done to protect those? In addition to that, as we lead into the next couple of things, is does the company have a policy to lock down USB ports so they can't use external media? Do they have a policy on printing out hard copy documents that are now at home that may contain sensitive information? And then we also get into, can the individual or does the individual use the laptop for personal use, which we can all assume they do. But the question becomes is what kind of visibility do we have into what those users are doing on those laptops when they're not connected to VPN? As we've mentioned a couple of times, is malicious actors, and we've seen this over the last week or so, has really picked up. We've had 2 major security incidents that we're aware of that they're not going to rest. They now know that users are working from home and it gives them a new avenue to explore and to try to exploit. And so those actors are going to take advantage of users working from home. And the last item I put on here, which isn't really a security concern, but in a way it does deal with security, is a risk, I guess is a better word, is the backups. Backup and recovery of systems on the remote workers. As they move the files down to their laptops, they're no longer on the corporate network. What happens if they lose a file? What happens if they accidentally delete a file? How do we go about, protecting those files or helping those users in those situations? So those are kind of some of the things that we're seeing. Pete, do you have anything you want to add into there? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you said it pretty adequately there. I mean, it's an interesting problem, right? Clients are sending machines home that were previously on isolated networks, that were previously meticulously and deliberately segmented from on that device and from other devices on the network. And now we're throwing those into essentially open wireless networks at home. So you have different consumer grade devices that are in the environment with now these company-owned devices. So how do we protect those company devices now? I mean, VPN's a pretty easy solution there, right? But Chris, to your point earlier, understanding the threat landscape and how it's exponentially expanding as all users are going to become remote. So I mean, we have to know where 2-factor is needed, where it's currently used, where it needs to expand at, but also understanding clients' current capabilities around EDR, around IAM, network monitoring, and even as a simple point of ensuring that least privilege is enacted across the environment.
Yeah, that is a great point. And we will get to the least privilege and talking about some of the short-term things that we can do that we may or may not have already done to protect users. So one of the things we wanted to do as we walk through here is we wanted to walk you through a scenario of basically what a VPN user has gone through over or not necessarily the user, but what IT has gone through as they've expanded the remote workforce. And then the situation we're looking at here is, our normal business flow is we have our workers that are in the offices. They're accessing the data apps internally. They're utilizing any web apps or public-facing apps that they can. And everything works and everything goes through the security policies, the infrastructure and the systems that have been set up to protect the users and the data and the assets that the company has. But what has happened, or what we saw, is we saw a minor shift in where now there's a lot of users working from home. And one of the things that we saw that almost immediately jumped up was we don't have the internet bandwidth to support that many remote users. And what a lot of people hadn't considered is that as traffic's being tunneled back to the data centers, that traffic has to traverse the internet connection twice, once coming in and once going out. And that tied up a lot of the bandwidth and created a lot of issues for the workforces. And so they had to start thinking about ways, how do we get around this? How do we eliminate, not necessarily eliminate, but how do we reduce the amount of traffic that's coming back across the VPN tunnel? And that led to a discussion about using split tunneling. For those of us who have been in IT for a while, we all know split tunneling is a big no-no. Everybody's been told best practice is to tunnel everything back, utilize the security stack that's sitting in the headquarters of the data centers, and life is good. But I think what we've all learned over the last week or two here is that is true until you scale to the point where I don't think anybody anticipated. And so now we have to start thinking about, okay, if we're going to do split tunneling, what concerns do we introduce? What have we solved? First, we took a good portion of that traffic, and instead of sending it back to the data center, we just let it go directly to the internet. So maybe users accessing Office 365 or WebEx, Zoom, or you know, forbidden that anybody ever goes to YouTube or Netflix while at work. I'm sure they're definitely doing it at home. When you look at all the statistics, Netflix has gone up quite a bit. But it creates a concern. Is okay, now we have a traffic from my user's laptop that's going directly to the internet, and we have no visibility into it. While it solved one problem, meaning it relieves some of the stress on the internet connection, it created another. And that leads us to our first, what can we do to kind of plug the hole or fill the gap a little? And there's two ways. There's really one major way, but the first way that we're looking at is look at using a DNS level security solution, such as Cisco Umbrella or Cloudflare, that allows you to get a little bit of visibility, but it also allows you to provide a little layer of security at the DNS level. So what this does is every time a user wants to go to a website or go to the internet for something, they have to do a DNS lookup. And so what Umbrella and Cloudflare do is they sit at that DNS layer and they provide a little extra benefit of security and inspection to say, hey, is that a known malicious site they're trying to go to, or you know, is that a site that we don't want them to go to, such as Netflix or YouTube or something to that effect? You can really get granular in your policy of where you want them to go, or you can keep it pretty broad depending on what you want to do. Pete, have you seen any other issues or any other solutions that they've looked at?
Yeah, no, I mean, what you're presenting right here, I mean, it sounds like a fantastic solution to what a lot of clients are seeing, right? I mean, typically we're not talking about split tunneling in this. That's only an extreme example, right? And as it pertains to my role with Burwood, I have to start thinking about split tunneling as it regards to zero trust. So do we know what's coming across the VPN, right? The VPN is going to provide that confidentiality and the integrity of the user and their traffic, but there's nothing to say what that traffic's actually being piped in through that concentrator. So that insider threat almost becomes that VPN user that you're also trying to protect there, right? So this is a really interesting a situation that organizations are being put into. And what you're presenting right now, the DNS layer security, I mean, this seems like and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like a pretty quick, or it could be a quicker solution to at least confront the problems that organizations are being presented with right now.
Yeah, you're dead on. This is a quick and I don't want to call it dirty, but a simple solution that an organization could use to try to mitigate or try to put something in place that would at least give them a layer of security. Like you said, and you bring up a very valid point, is zero trust is on top of everybody's mind right now, and all of a sudden we just broke it, or even for that matter, we're recommending breaking that zero trust. So yeah, this is a fantastic starting solution, or starting point, So what I want to do real quick is I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about Citrix. Citrix, everybody's used Citrix, or a lot of people have used Citrix, and it provides a lot more security. And the reason for that is basically you're just streaming a screen or using a remote desktop solution to access a terminal that sits in the data center. So all of the current security configurations, all of the policies currently apply, even though a user's sitting at home. While they're physically sitting at home, they're virtually working from the same office or from the data center that they were before. And that provides an amazing level of security and an amazing level of comfort to organizations that have had to scale. The big issue that we've seen with Citrix is that as we go down a path of more and more applications becoming SaaS-based or cloud-based applications, we're seeing a shift away from the in-house or company-owned apps to internet-based apps. And the best example I can give of that is Office 365. We've all been used to Exchange sitting in our data center. We access the database, everything's good, and now it's shifted that to the internet or to the cloud and hosted by Microsoft. And so with Citrix, that leads us to, again, all the data is traveling back and forth, right? And it creates a little bit of a what do I want to call it, a little bit of a question of how do we want to scale our environment going forward into the future that, let's assume, it's only going to get worse from here, and we have to support remote users for a longer period of time. And instead of being a few months, what if it turns into 4 or 6 months? Are we prepared to handle that? The next stop that we wanted to discuss was what are some temporary things or short-term fixes that we could look at that could possibly help an organization. One we've already talked about, which was setting up a DNS layer solution that kind of gave us a little layer or a little level of protection and visibility into what users are doing from home, regardless of whether they were on VPN or connected via VPN or whether they were offline. Pete, would you like to discuss the auditing of accounts and
For sure.
access?
Yeah, so I mean, as a foundational level, this is already be done on a lot of organizations, but the clients I've been working with, even over the last year or two, we have to have constant conversations about the importance of regular audits of your directory, of accounts in the environment, to make sure that the principle of least privilege is being ensured across the organization. And especially now, we have a lot of end users who, if they're going over VPN, they may not have that layered security approach to be able to ensure that you only have the permissions you're allowed to have or that you should have, or access to certain servers or web applications that they should be having. So this doesn't take too much effort from a IT perspective, right? I mean, it completely matters the size of your user base. But being able to actively audit those accounts and making sure that users have appropriate access, it's a pretty foundational concern and pretty easy fix. That's something I do on a pretty regular basis, or at least help clients walk through that information, right?
Yeah, and that's a great point, especially when we consider from a malicious actor's perspective, the majority of the incidents we've seen lately are around social engineering and gaining access to somebody's account information. And once they've got that, whatever permission that user has, they have that ability as well. So anytime you can reduce that threat footprint is a good thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it comes down to how the attacker's mindset's changing against a completely remote workforce. So previously, we were able to rely on that layered approach where you were able to have inbound protections, you're able to have host-based protections or outbound filtering. Now we don't necessarily get that if everything's being routed in there. So if people are going straight onto the internet, they're not using a VPN to access data, they're not getting those same protections. So we have to make sure that users are forced either to use a VPN or that they're forced to use a Citrix session. You know, there's multiple different solutions to it. But the mindset of where that threat landscape or the attacker mindset, it changes a little bit. While it gets a little bit more difficult for some hackers or attackers to actually target you, you now have in your environment unsecured consumer-grade products that are much easier to target. So again, like I've said multiple times, it's an interesting problem that, you know, the solution to this is ever-changing.
Yeah, I think I'll add on to that. One of the things that I know I've done at previous organizations is we've used Microsoft Labs to, instead of, you know, having one local admin account that had the same password across 1,000 devices, we use Labs to help us roll out different passwords for all those laptops.
Yeah, and that leads to the account provisioning and account auditing, right? If we have service accounts that are allowed on some servers that that level of credentials don't need to be on there, you know, we need to be able to look at that information, or just user accounts. You know, there shouldn't be password reuse being able to be used across an environment. You know, the most immature companies can at least provide that layer of security to end users. Yeah.
Great. All right, so the next thing we have on our list is coming up with a process to handle patch management. As I mentioned earlier, as crazy as it might seem, this may go on for several months. And now we've got, you know, who knows, hundreds, thousands of laptops out there that may be company owned or may not be company owned, that we need to make sure the patches are up to date. And here's another simple thing that we can work through to help secure or help provide another layer of security to the environment. The next item is you know, roundtable discussions on incident response or disaster planning. Pete and I were talking yesterday, and both of us have been through a lot of roundtables in our time discussing disaster recovery and incidents and things of that sort, and all of them centered around, you know, we lost our data center, or we lost this branch office, or something to that effect. I don't think any one of us has ever thought of what happens if the entire workforce shifts to remote or work from home. So I don't know, Pete, what were your thoughts?
I mean, it's a difficult problem to have because we don't plan for something like this. I mean, it's hard to plan for something like this at least, right? Hospitals, they might be the outlier in the client pool that they may have a plan for this. But you know, a small health clinic or a small rural health clinic or a hospital out in Iowa, do they actually plan for this information? Not necessarily. But it is up to the senior leadership of the IT department to say, if we have an influx of remote users that need to be introduced into the environment or need to be able to use VPN, what does that plan look like? How do we get those account provisioned properly? How do we ensure that access is provisioned and secured? You know, those conversations, they're ongoing. They're they're always fluctuating. But roundtable discussions, I can say, for a pandemic, a global pandemic that hits for something like this, I haven't been a part of one of those roundtable discussions. I don't know about you, Chris.
No, that might change.
Yeah, it more than likely will, hopefully.
So one more item that we want to kind of encourage, if you will, is, you know, there are several organizations out there, but two I want to point out is the NIST Framework and CIS Control. each of these organizations have a framework or a system set up that basically gives you a layered approach or a maturity path to improving your IT, your cybersecurity, or your IT footprint. And some of these, a lot of the things that we've discussed, such as, reducing admin access to only those who need it, controlling permissions, vulnerability testing, all of these are inside of these controls. And one of the things that I'll point out in an example here is the CIS controls. They have an entire library of benchmark documents that you can download that basically give you a blueprint for how to configure a Windows OS, a Cisco router, a firewall. They go through, these are the simple things that you can do to basically secure those devices. And they're wonderful documents for starting off and getting a little taste for what small things you can do to improve those footprints. I'm not sure if you used any of those documents, Pete?
Yeah, so we've done multiple, or I've done multiple NIST CSF assessments for clients. And while the suggestions can be a little broad and a little vague at times, it does give you an understanding of here are the areas that we need to at least understand and better prepare the organization for to be considered compliant, or in this case, to be considered ready for a remote workforce to be able to go home. Specifically, with CSF, identifying those machines that are in the environment, that are remote, that are using VPN or that are using Citrix, and then knowing what users using those machines, being able to correlate that data, that helps out tremendously. Those EDR, endpoint detection and response capabilities, in my opinion, it's a pretty nice one to do high capabilities in it right now. But those are conversations I'm definitely trying to, especially at a time. Even further than that, Chris, now is the right phishing campaign or social engineering campaign get done, or is right now the right time to get, is right now a right time to get a pen test done for their organization? I think right now is a pretty ideal time. Maybe don't try some DDoS testing against your concentrator, against your VPN, but right now I would say it's an ideal time to at least attempt to phish some users, not maliciously, attempt to phish some users to see how they react and see what that impact would be. Because that's going to largely be one of the major vectors that an attacker may come at an organization that's all workforce or that's all remote based now.
Yeah, that's great. So as we encourage, one of the things we want to start thinking about is, and we've mentioned this a couple of times, is now that we've always talked in IT about everybody has a desire to work from home. They feel like they can be more productive working from home, and businesses up until 3 or 4 weeks ago were very resistant to work from home and may still be resistant to work from home. But one of the questions that we've asked ourselves is, how is that going to change over the next 4 to 6 months if this continues to drag along as it does and users continue to work from home and the experience continues to improve? How will businesses and executives look at the work from home ability? Will they want to continue to support it? When this is all said and done, will they shift the workforce back to the offices? And that is something that I believe in IT, or as leaders in IT, we need to start thinking about. So we're almost over the hump of the crisis of getting everybody moved to remote capabilities. Now we need to start thinking about what's going to happen when this is over. And that leads us to the next slide that we want to talk about, and that's called Sassi, Secure Access Service Edge. There's a few vendors out there that are starting to move towards this model, and there's a few vendors out there that are really looking hard at pushing hard to move towards this model. And basically what this model is it's taking a company's internet edge and pushing it into the cloud. And what this does is it eliminates some of the problems that you see with the remote workers or with offices and things of that sort, because everything is driven through a cloud infrastructure that's highly available and highly scalable. And what the Sassi platform does is it provides the interface or the gateway for identity and access management, secure web gateways, firewalls, IPSs and IDSs, DLPs, sandboxing, bandwidth controls should you need them. It basically opens up your ability to inspect and look at traffic no matter where it's coming from, whether it's or going to, whether it's coming from the internet, whether it's going to the internet, whether it's heading to the data center or coming out of the data center. It gives you a great amount of visibility into what that's doing and allows you to centralize how you're looking at your security and how you're getting the visibility into it. What do you think of this model, Pete?
No, it's interesting. And so, I mean, what we talked about yesterday, and you may have it in another slide, but Prisma Access from Palo Alto, right? I mean, you had some pretty good insights with Prisma itself. I know that the security team, at least at Burwood, we're starting to take a concentration on at least understanding how we can throw that edge up into the cloud and better secure clients with. So, I mean, is there any additional information that, Chris, you can provide from a Palo Alto perspective about what they're doing with Prisma?
Yeah, so they've really, Prisma is very interesting. I think they're one of the market leaders in the Sassi model. Zscaler would be another one if we wanted to throw in another vendor. And for that matter, a client could build their own Sassi model in the cloud if they wanted to. Might not be cheap. But Palo Alto's Prisma is a very interesting platform that you get the laptops or the remote offices connected up to the Sassi provider. In this case, it would be Palo Alto. And then the same thing, you connect the data centers in there, and then you can determine how you want to set up the security policies, how you want to route the traffic. And since Palo Alto's Prisma sits on the edge with the Azure, with AWS, with GCP, they are very low latency when dealing with hitting cloud-based applications or routing that traffic to your data center. So I guess the way I look at it is that as we move down and we start talking about cloud-first strategy, and we start talking about, what are we going to do 4 or 6 months from now? How are we going to address this long-term if the company moves towards a more work-from-home friendly environment? I believe Sassi is the model the companies are going to want to take a good hard look at.
Yeah, I think you took my question right there. I was going to say, how long is mandatory work first going to be happening? We don't know at this point how long the pandemic's going to last or what the proliferation of remote work is going to be afterwards. So for a model like this, do we see it being a sustainable solution going forward, in your opinion?
I do think it's a sustainable solution going forward. I think this is going to be the way you see security head. I think if we really look back at where security has gone over the last couple of years, is one of the focuses has been CASB, identity and access management. So everybody started moving towards using cloud-based apps such as Office 365 or Workforce or what have you, or Salesforce. I'm sorry, not Workforce. And yet you still had to authenticate, you still had to validate those users. And so you had to get CASB, you had to get some type of identity and access management solution. Well, now this kind of builds on that. This is the next layer of that. Is in addition to those methods, I think this is the route people are going to go to give them greater control over over what their user base is capable of doing. So with all of that, I'm sorry that was such a mouthful. I hope we gave you a lot of information. I guess we'll open it back up, turn it back over to Pauline for questions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, thank you, and Pete. Great discussion. We do have a couple minutes left here, so let's go ahead and unmute the line. So just remember, if you are an attendee here, please mute on your own if you don't have anything to add. Otherwise, we have the lines unmuted now, so if anyone does have a question you'd like to chime in with, please do. I do have one come in the chat, Pete and Chris, regarding the roundtable mention. You mentioned that neither of you have yet been involved in any pandemic-related roundtable, but question about how to productively get that started. Is now the right time, or are you suggesting after things settle down a bit? And how would you make that first meeting productive related to the pandemic, right? Initial goals out of that first discussion, that kind of thing. Any more comments on the productivity of that?
Pete, you want that one, or you want me to take it?
I think we can both take it. So, I mean, just from a starting point, typically there's always a security champion that's taking over, leading those discussions. So, from an initial conversation, you know, we have to plant that scenario of what we're trying to accomplish, who the key stakeholders are going to be, if people are going to be going remote, who's going to be the stakeholders to manage access to remote users, manage the devices, and so on and so forth. There's Burwood, I mean, and what I've done with Burwood as recently, you know, we're building out those practices. So we are exactly trying to get the organization prepared for in such an extreme situation.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that is that, you know, I can't say when the best time to start it is, and I say that because every organization is different. And we have to remember that these roundtables are not IT roundtables, they're business roundtables. Every group should be involved in the conversation to help drive awareness and help make it more meaningful from the business's perspective.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Pete. Well, we are about at time, so I think that will conclude our session for today. Thank you all so much for joining us and listening and participating, and thanks again, Chris and Pete. As I mentioned at the beginning, each of you can expect to receive this recording link and the downloadable slides via email. And we've also got our contact info up here on the screen. Please connect with myself, Chris, or Pete directly if you have any questions at all. Happy to talk on a one-on-one basis. And reminder that this is a weekly series we've kicked off today. So join us next week, same day, same time, Thursday, April 9th at 1 p.m. Central. And we're going to dive into the desktop and application access arena of remote workforce strategy, talking more about desktop options and accessibility. So with that, I'll wrap this up. Thanks again for joining Burwood today, and I hope you each have a productive and safe day. Thanks so much.